and welcome to This is USG, a video podcast presented by the universities at Shady Grove. 9 universities, 1 campus, great results. I'm Khademian, the Executive Director of USG. Today, we have a very special guest, Dr. Jay Perman, the 5th Chancellor of the University System of Maryland. Before becoming Chancellor, Dr. Perman served as the President of the University of Maryland, Baltimore for more than a decade. I'm going to not read his bio and just welcome him right now. Hello, Chancellor Perman. It's so great to have you here. Thank you for joining us.
Well, it's great to be here, Dr. Khademian, and I am particularly pleased to see you in that chair. We are so fortunate. Shady Grove, really the entire system, is so fortunate to have you leading the USG. And I'm just thrilled about it. So here's another chance for us to have one of the many conversations we're having as USG moves forward.
Well, I'm very grateful for this opportunity. Thank you for your kind words, and really excited to be working with you and everyone in the system. So lots of good things for all of us ahead. May I call you Jay?
Yes, please.
Thank you so much. So Jay, rather than read your bio, I'm going to ask you to share with us, you have this amazing experience and background that you bring to this position. Tell us a little bit about who is Jay Perman and what you bring to this position.
Well, thank you, Ann. I think I'd like to approach the response by reflecting on a question that's often asked of me as I move forward in this role, which I'm very humbled to have. And the question usually goes like this: what's a physician doing being the chancellor of a higher education system? Haven't you wandered too far? And that's a very legitimate question. While it's true that my career has been focused on academics, it's really been focused on academic medicine. And as a result, my language had really been more of what you'd expect of your doctor, your physician, than talking about undergraduates, first-generation students, completion rates, access. I mean, you don't expect a physician to talk that way. So what kind of an imposter am I? And let me try to explain, because as I said, it's a totally legitimate question that doesn't insult me. As a physician caring for patients and their families over more than 4 decades, here's what I've learned. I've learned that for many children and families, and I am a pediatrician, making the correct diagnosis and prescribing the right treatment is the easy part of the job. Now, you must be sitting there, you, Ann, and others who listen to this and saying, well, he's an arrogant guy. It's the easy part of the job. You know what the hard part of the job is? The hard part of the job is making sure that one's acumen in diagnosis and management has half a chance of working. Because for so many families, and in my case, the children in those families, they exist in an environment that works against their health. They don't have sufficient resources. They don't have sufficient good nutrition, partly because there may be issues of affordability, access to good nutrition, knowledge about good nutrition. They don't have easy means of transportation so that they can get health care. They have housing that may mitigate against their good health. You can probably all see what I'm getting at. No matter the brilliance of my physicianmanship, if those other issues are not addressed, nothing is accomplished. So again, you can see where I'm going. It finally dawned on me that to make the real difference in giving us what we all want, what we all have a right to, good health, people have to have an education. They have to have the chance to have a good education. An education that in turn will provide them the knowledge they need to understand, for example, what I said about nutrition. And yes, obviously, the means to have decent housing, adequate transportation, access to the sort of things that make a difference to health. Otherwise, those of us who deliver healthcare, for large segments of our American population and the population around the world, it won't make a difference. So I decided that I needed to move my focus to doing whatever I can in conjunction with great people like you, Ann, and great institutions like USG to give people a crack at an education.
That is a remarkable overview of how you approach your job and how you bring your experience and your history and your humanness to this job. So thank you for that. It's a very holistic, integrated look at the kind of challenges we face today. We're all in partnership with this, aren't we? Everybody, all institutions, all professions, we're all in partnership with addressing the inequities and the challenges today. And that really leads me to my next question. You know, you became chancellor in January, and a few months later, we were all dealing with a massive pandemic. And we're still dealing with that pandemic and trying to navigate it. I'm sure you've been asked this question before, but could you share with us a little bit about how the pandemic and having to dig in as the new chancellor to try to navigate this with all of the university partners and university leaders, how did the pandemic shape your approach to leading the University System of Maryland? How have those two interacted in terms of your approach? We can't disconnect them, right? They're very connected. Just as you've described all these interconnections between health and education, the pandemic has become our context now for so much. I'm wondering if you could talk a little bit about how the pandemic has shaped the way you've approached governing and leading the University System of Maryland.
Well, let me reflect a little bit in response to your question. First of all, you can imagine the number of people who have made comments about the seemingly great fortune that the system has, in fact, in having a physician at the helm during this crisis, as if it were planned. And of course, I'm not even going to say it was dumb luck, because, you know, I hardly hold myself out to be an infectious disease specialist or an epidemiologist. So the first thing I want to say in terms of the pandemic and my role is people shouldn't make too much out of it because I'm no expert. I may be able to understand the technicalities and have the right instincts in certain matters, but I'm hardly an expert. So I'm swimming in this with everybody else. And of course, who would have known? And in fact, Anne, you know, when people make comments about, oh, physician, right person, you know, I hope that at the end of this, people are going to say, you know, Perman, you were a pretty good chancellor, despite the fact that you're a physician. In fact, you know, and nobody wants to give that virus credit for a darn thing. It's our enemy. But as with everything else, there are silver linings that if one is looking for them, one can find, even in something like this. And what's happened as a result of us suddenly having to confront this scourge on our society and certainly on higher education, what's happened is that we've learned a lesson, again, that Robert Fulghum wrote in a book about 30 years ago. I don't know how many of you remember the book, Everything I Really Needed to Know, I Learned in Kindergarten.
Yes.
I bet a lot of us read it. Yeah. I read it many times, and I've reflected on it a lot because he's pretty much on the mark, I'm afraid, despite the fact that we all cleave to higher education. We learned a lot in kindergarten. And he lists at the beginning of the book some principal lessons that one learns in kindergarten. And the wrap-up lesson, for those of you who might recall, is it's important when we go out into the world that we hold hands and stick together. And that has been the silver lining as it relates to the University System of Maryland, and I suspect other aggregated institutions that are in systems across the country. Suddenly, our rugged individualism as institutions, and mind you, we've worked well as a system, suddenly it truly comes to the fore where we hold hands and stick together. And as you know, Anne, even in your newness to the role, we come together not once a month like we used to have a conversation as presidents and executive directors and the chancellor and the chancellor's staff. We come together several times a week. We've embraced Zoom and other methodologies. And we lift up each other and we teach each other. And we adjust based on one another's experience. That bodes very well for the changes that we must make in higher education that we knew about before there was ever a pandemic. But now we're holding hands and sticking together.
Yeah, you know, those calls that I've had the privilege to join now since I'm new in this role are really fascinating, and the sharing and kind of information sharing and support network that you've developed through those calls is really, really tremendous. You mentioned that there are changes that we're pursuing now because of COVID that have been there for a while. Higher education has been a pretty stable industry, if you will, for a long time. And COVID-19, the pandemic, systemic racism, a number of things are showing us the cracks in the system and the need for change and the need for innovation. I think the University System of Maryland is one of the interesting models in the country for how a system can work and how collaboration can work. Could you talk a little bit about how you see the University System of Maryland in the grander scheme of higher education? You know, I'm thinking about your leadership in Baltimore at the University of Maryland, Baltimore, where you really focused on community engagement and building the community center and really taking the knowledge and the learning and the opportunities of the university and integrating with and building with and sharing and learning back from the community. That seemed to have been a real key strength of your leadership at the University of Maryland, Baltimore. I wonder if you could talk about how some of your original ideas and some of this work that you brought to your role as president, how you're bringing that to the role of chancellor, and how you see the system in the grander scheme of higher education. What kinds of innovations can we pursue? What role do you think the system will play, the University System of Maryland, in changing and transforming higher education in ways that are so urgently needed?
Well, again, I've perhaps not used the word, but I think if I had to choose one word that encapsulated the approach I took in Baltimore, and thank you for your comments, both within the university and in the context of our being part of the community, you know, I would use the word collaboration. It's a big word and maybe it's cold. You know, it reflects together, find ways to do things together. In fact, I made a promise about collaboration, and you don't know this. In my inaugural address in 2010, I had the nerve to entitle the inaugural address I gave as follows: leadership, and I didn't mean just my leadership, I meant the leadership of the institution and the system. Leadership by collaboration. You know, sometimes we think about leaders as being out there in front and being strong and individualistic, et cetera, and everybody comes behind. And that's not the way I saw the world, and it's not the way I see the world. I have found that the strongest leaders are leaders that can get everybody into the same room and say, hey, let's figure out how we're going to do this. What do you think? What do you think? That's leadership to me, and that's what I expected at the University of Maryland, Baltimore. That's what I expect as chancellor. And if I can ramble on a little bit, I'll eventually weave that back to USG. And again, people probably know where I'm going. This is not extraordinarily creative. At UMB, we had 7 ruggedly individualistic and highly successful professional schools. And, you know, to draw an analogy, you mentioned 9 universities at USG. I get it. And I think over the years at UMB, we figured out how, number one, not to spoil, not to denigrate the individualism of those schools, those professional schools that led them to be and lead them to be highly ranked, while at the same time figuring out how this can even lift them up more. So that's the inside, the collaboration. And then you mentioned the collaboration with the community, which can never be, here we are, the authorities, the intellectuals, we know what's good for you. We're going to save you. It can never be that. It has to be a two-way street. And I know that I realized constantly that I need to thank and needed to thank our neighbors in West Baltimore for being our teachers, for giving us their time, allowing us into their neighborhoods, into their homes, into their lives. And at UMB, teaching us how to be culturally competent and caring. And yes, that's my attitude for us as a system. But now let's bring it back to the universities at Shady Grove, and you get it already. 9 universities. And I know, Ann, that you and I have been talking about, as we've gotten to know each other, how the 9 universities can deliver their extraordinary programs. But take a little time also to figure out what they can do with each other at Shady Grove. Then we'll get a richer experience. And it begins to deal with what we've got to do in higher education. We've got to do much more sharing. And I don't mean just the proverbial sharing of, for example, back office functions, which we always need to look at. The system is very good at effectiveness and efficiency. No, I mean how we can share our intellectual prowess, how we can enrich what students get by taking one from column A and one from column B, no matter which university is offering it, in order to make a richer experience. And ditto with the community. Now, the community we often think of as a highly successful industry corridor, a lot of bioscience, other industries. That's the neighborhood of USG. And again, lots of rich collaborative responsibilities and opportunities so that we can lead, so that Ann Khademian can lead by collaboration.
Well, thank you for taking us to USG, and it's very exciting to hear you talk about collaboration and sharing. I like the term sharing. That's very nice. It's sharing our intellectual energy, our intellectual resources, our problem-solving focus, the energy that comes from working together, and that's how we see ourselves here at USG. So if we could talk a little bit more about the model of USG and how you see that as part of the system. I'm learning a lot about USG right now. This is my 4th week, so I still have a lot to learn. But what I do know is that it is a space where the 9 university partners and even partners within individual universities can do a lot here that might not be able to be done on their home campuses, not because of lack of imagination or anything, but space matters, location matters, opportunities to interact matters. And Shady Grove is also a gateway for a large population in Montgomery County of first-generation students and underrepresented students who have opportunities to come here. So Shady Grove is a location where universities can provide services and access to underrepresented populations, access affordability. We have partnerships with Montgomery County, or with Montgomery College, and of course with Montgomery County Public Schools, which I want to talk with you about in a minute. But last week, we talked to the heads of the dentistry school and the social work school and nursing and pharmacy, all from UMB. And that conversation was so exciting to listen to the ways that they are innovating and creating and thinking about how they can work together to take a very holistic approach to education and to patient care as well. So those kinds of possibilities are definitely here. And so we see ourselves as really an asset to the system. We see ourselves as a great collaborative sharing asset to the University System of Maryland, along with the other higher education centers. And we want to do our best to be part of this bigger initiative. Yeah, we think we're a pretty cool place right here in Shady Grove. It's a great team and a wonderful place to be. But we really see ourselves as part of this bigger system and helping this bigger system to succeed. I'm wondering how you think about Shady Grove. You've already shared a little bit about the sharing aspect of it and the collaboration aspect of it. How do you see Shady Grove and other regional centers in the context of the system? What kind of expansive opportunities or what kind of growth and opportunity do you see with these very unique regional centers that you don't see in other systems? What do you see for the role that we can play in making the University System of Maryland more successful in its broad mission?
Well, this may sound problematic in a way, but for some of the things you've been reflecting on and I've been reflecting on, I see Shady Grove as a platform. Coming back to the notion of collaboration, there have been papers, manuscripts, publications that, yes, focus on collaboration in science that demonstrate a direct correlation between physical proximity and the likelihood of collaboration, the likelihood of exchange of ideas. That's not surprising. And in fact, institutions like MIT have built many of their research buildings with a very conscious effort in terms of the way they're built and who populates them to mix people up. Not to say there's a theme here, but deliberately to mix people up. Things that you wouldn't think go together. Now, to me, that's the universities at Shady Grove. And I think that's a great opportunity if we can seize on it. We can try things in terms of teaching each other's students, aggregating things that we'd like to aggregate, but that perhaps one institution has and one doesn't, or one institution excels at. You know, it's much easier. We've worked very hard to do this between UMB and College Park, or UMB and UMBC. But you know, with regard to College Park and UMB, 40 miles is 40 miles. Look at what we could do potentially at USG.
Well, we're excited to be that platform and to do more of that. If I could just ask you one more question. I know I've taken a lot of your time, but this is so exciting to talk with you.
Well, you know, I don't hesitate to pontificate, and I apologize for that.
No, it's not pontification. It's energizing for all of us to hear you reflect. It's wonderful. You and I talked initially in the early, when I was first, possibly coming on board for this job. You raised the importance of the pipelines in higher education and the importance of connecting with, especially Montgomery County Public Schools, which is our partner here in Montgomery County. And you also raised, kind of really thinking through the opportunities for students coming from, elementary, middle, high school into community college, into four-year programs, and really working on, building that pipeline, which we are focused like a laser on that. And we also talked about another aspect of connectivity, which is through research and through research collaboration and through translational research. And, we're excited to be part of both of those, again, as a facilitator, as a platform, as a connector, as someone who has expertise in bringing folks together and helping to make all this work. Could you talk a little bit about your passion for the pipeline and all the way back? I think it goes back to the heart of your philosophy, which is be connected, be part of the community, share the resources and learn from everyone as well. And if you could, I think it would be a nice note for us to end on, for you to share with us your passion and why you think the pipeline work is so important, and also the connectivity on the on the broader community kind of business industry side as well. That would be really helpful for us to hear you talk about that.
Well, let me start with the second one first and then finish with school children. After all, you all have to tolerate me. I see the world through the prism of children, and that's me. With regard to the research piece, it really comes down to the great opportunities that we need to take advantage of at USG with regard to experiential learning. And you and I have talked and will continue to talk with leadership across the system about the extraordinary opportunities afforded us by the Research Institute, which is part of the system that is just next door, IBBR, where bioscience, bioresearch thrives. But we haven't had enough energy put toward making sure that those students that come to USG can take advantage of the experiences that they might have with our scientists from the University of Maryland at College Park, Baltimore. And we're going to work on that. And then beyond that, so many industry partners that are represented on your advisory board. Look at the experiential opportunities that they afford students at USG, and in turn, business and industry gets what it needs with regard to workforce, which is good for all of us, which is good for Maryland and beyond. Now, what about those school children that are growing up in Montgomery County and perhaps beyond, that are fortunate enough to be in a great school system like the Montgomery County schools, often going to their next stop at Montgomery College? We need those students desperately. The world needs those students. We obviously are focused on the other pandemic too, structural racism. And it plays out in so many ways. It plays out in some of the things I talked about at the beginning, because of course I'm talking about so many minority children and families and the opportunities they don't get. So we need to focus on hope and opportunity. And we bemoan the fact that in our own environment, higher education, in my other environment, the practice of medicine, where are the people of color? Where are the minorities? They're underrepresented compared to the general population. Well, to me, it's because higher education has not done enough to reach down. And I don't mean down in a pejorative way, I mean it in terms of age. Reach down to elementary and middle school. Instead of waiting like some fancy centerpiece, expecting all these great children to flow to us and be ready to be educated and take their place as successful people. We can't do that. We have to roll up our sleeves and partner with elementary and middle and high school to help them, help the children they care about to have hope and ability and a wide angle lens that says to them, oh, I can do this. I'm going to get a chance to be that. I'll tell you a story to end on in terms of pipeline. And it's a story I tell often, but I don't think I've told it to a USG audience. About 5-6 years ago, for those of you who know Baltimore, next to the University of Maryland, Baltimore, is an iconic public market called the Lexington Market. It's been there for 200 years. And in recent decades, it becomes hard to find healthy food, particularly for children. So the then mayor, Stephanie Rawlings Blake, and I did an event with the US Department of Agriculture to promote healthy food for children at the Lexington Market. And there were some opportunities, but not widely appreciated. So we did a news conference. And then after the news conference, they had set up tables, one for the mayor and one for me, with some third graders from a West Baltimore school. And the exercise at the table, which fit with the theme of the event, was to do food art. Now, you may know what food art is. I certainly didn't. Here's what food art is. On the table, I was sitting at the head of the table, kids on both sides, were plates, and on the plates were slices of apple that were carved to look like the sides of a race car, and some grapes, and some toothpicks. And the grapes, of course, are the wheels. The apples are the sides, and you can make a race car with the toothpicks. Well, there was a little fella named Xavier, an eighth grader, probably a third grader, probably 8 years old, sitting next to me. And he saw that I wasn't very good at this, not very good at the food art. And like kids so dear are, he offered to help. He said, here, I'll help you. So we fumbled around with the food art. And, you know, given the fact that I'm a pediatrician, I should know how to make conversation with kids. So I asked him the usual thing, Ann, and it's pertinent to this conversation, very pertinent. I said, Xavier, what are you going to be when you grow up? And he answered me the way children often answer, particularly children who have role models in professional sports. He talked about the NBA and the NFL, which I'm totally supportive of, but he could probably tell from my face that I was not too inspired nor convinced that he was going to make it. And like this, Ann, he turned on a dime and he looked me straight in the face and he said, or maybe I'll have your job. Now,
that's great.
I probably smiled. He was so cute, and he was cute. And every time I tell that story, people have the same reaction. It's cute. But you know, I reflect on that statement all the time. Because between that kid in third grade in an urban school system and my job, which he has a right to have, probably 1,000 obstacles. So our collective responsibility in higher education and at Shady Grove is to remove as many of those obstacles as possible. So Xavier from West Baltimore gets a crack at my job. That's what we need to do.
That's a fantastic story and a great analogy for all of us to understand the challenges ahead. Absolutely. I think Shady Grove is at the heart of this equity challenge and the equity promise. We have students who come and they start out thinking about wanting to be maybe a teacher, and they leave thinking about being a superintendent. And that's exactly the challenge. Overcoming those barriers, making it a smooth opportunity. So aspiration and hard work can take them to wherever they want to go. Chancellor Perman, Jay, thank you so much for taking time with us today. It has really been a wonderful conversation, very insightful. I know the USG community is really going to appreciate this opportunity to hear from you and to hear you reflect on USG as well, and all the work we have ahead of us. And we all look forward to working with you. We're on board. Thank you so much.
My pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you.